Hi, I'm Naisha McCauley, and you're watching AccessTV.org.
Good morning, this is Jonathan Small, host of All About You. This program is broadcast every week at AccessTV.org studios in downtown Hartford. This show is designed to give the guests a chance to give their life story. And this morning I have a legend here in Connecticut. He's been labeled the Dean of News in Connecticut. He is a veteran news anchor pretty much throughout his whole entire career, basically in this state of Connecticut. I have this morning as my special guest, Al Terzi. Good morning, Al. How you doing?
Good morning, Jonathan. I'm doing fine. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, that's good to hear. Could you kind of let people know exactly where you were born and raised?
Well, I was born in a little town in upstate New York called Little Falls. It's about 20 miles east of Utica, and a lot of people might be familiar with that if they've driven the New York Thruway heading to Buffalo, that sort of thing. They pass through Utica. But I spent most of my growing up years in Utica, graduated from high school there. Wow, 54 years ago.
Okay, wow, right.
But 54 years ago was a very special time in my life too, because that's when I got my first radio job. I was a DJ.
Okay.
Back then I was AJ the DJ.
AJ the DJ, all right.
You know, how corny is that? But that was a lot of fun. I was on the air 40 hours a week. You know, most DJs today are not on the air 40 hours a week. They're doing other things too, but I was on the air 40 hours a week, playing records, you know, back when we had records, not the CDs and other digital devices and things that we have today,
right.
Or introducing programs that were transcribed. And when I talk about transcribed programs, these were not digital. These were on discs that sometimes were this big across.
Okay.
And the turntables were equally as big, and you'd have to take the arm, which had a little needle on it, and put it over onto the transcription, and then it would be a program on who knows what. That's how primitive it was back in 1960. At least where I worked, it was a small station. 250 watts of power. Okay, so that's small. You think about some of the stations today, they're 50,000 watts.
Yes.
That's a very small station, so the range of viewers, the signal would only reach out just so far, but it was a start.
Well, what made you decide that you wanted to get into DJing? Was there any particular other DJ that you kind of looked up to, that you just said, I might want to try this?
Well, actually, my cousin, he's now since passed away, Don DeRosa in upstate New York. He was a year and a half older than I, and when we were both teenagers, he would practice reading from the newspaper. He would read news from the newspaper. He would look at a newspaper print ad. It might be about a car, it might be about a drugstore, it might be about anything.
Right.
And he would improvise commercials based on what's the information and the graphics and the pictures in the ad. And I watched him do that many times and listened to him. And at one point, and I don't remember exactly when it was, I said, could I try that?
Okay. And
he let me try it, and we recorded it on a little tape machine, back when there was audio tape.
Audio tape, yeah.
And he said, you know, you're pretty good. And he was at the time working at that little station that I eventually got a job at, and he said he would, if he ever left to go to a bigger station. In fact, he did. He went to Utica,
yes.
And then from there he went to the Albany area, and then he was in Syracuse and so on. So he moved around quite a bit, but he stayed in upstate New York, basically in that 100-mile, 150-mile range during his career. But he did introduce me to his general manager, and they gave me an audition, reading commercials and reading news, and hired me on the spot. So here I was. At the time, let's see, I was 17 years old. and I was AJ the DJ.
AJ the DJ, okay.
And I was having fun, and I even continued that when I went off to college after high school. But college was very different for me. A couple of things. Well, one thing for sure you should know is that my parents divorced in that period when I had just started becoming a DJ. And so I mean, it wasn't a messy divorce or anything like that, but they divorced. But here I was all set up to go to college, and I was enrolled in pre-med. I thought maybe I'd like to be a doctor.
Yes.
But of course, when the marriage split, then money started going every which way, but there was not much for me there. So I stayed in college one semester, and I left in part because of the money problem. That was the biggest reason. But also because I hadn't been, even though I had been an honor student, National Honor Society and all that in high school, graduated, I think it was 24th or so in my class of 325. So that was, I did pretty well in high school. And especially in science and math and that sort of thing. And I was involved in plays, and they even had a radio TV guild when I was in high school. So I did start getting interested in that then, but my association with my cousin is what got me going into broadcasting. So I left college after one semester. My grades weren't great, and I was kind of wandering in the dark, trying to figure out what's going to happen now. I was on my own, and I moved up to the Syracuse area to look for work on the air, and I did find work, but I had no money for a car. I had no way to get around except either by a bus or by hitchhiking.
Hitchhiking, yeah.
And that's what I did. I lived at the YMCA, and just had a room by myself. And you know, how I ever made it, I don't know. At some point, I met a young couple. I don't remember if it was a restaurant or how I met them, but they invited me to take a spot in their home, which was about 20 miles away, and they were driving me to Syracuse every day. And then I decided, you know, I should try to get my life together here. And I thought about the military, because at that time we had the military draft. And I didn't want to be drafted. I wanted to go into the military and do some things that I could, you know, try to pick and choose what I wanted to do in the military. And so eventually I did that. Even though I had a job in Syracuse on the air, I gave that up after a couple of months, and because I was really lost, you know, trying to figure out what would be next. And I went down to this recruiting station row. They had the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines. And I picked the Air Force. Okay. And I went off to basic training in April of 1961. And I stayed in the military for 7 years.
Now, excuse me, what kind of made you decide? I mean, you said you were kind of lost, so you was trying to actually find yourself.
Yeah.
But you didn't really see at that particular time a future in broadcasting. You kind of had doubts that maybe this really wasn't going to work out for you?
Well, part of the, no, I thought I could continue to do it, but I had heard about a job opening in Buffalo. And then I heard about the reason there was a job opening, and that was because the DJ had been drafted. Okay. And that's what got me to thinking, well, they're not going to hire me, because I had a draft card, and I was, back then they had classifications, I was 1A, which means I was at the top of the list to go if they needed, you know, if there were a big draft. So I decided, well, you know, maybe I better get my military obligation out of the way. At that time, you did have a military service obligation. And I thought, I'll get that out of the way, and I'll learn something that I want to learn, and, you know, be able to pick some programs. And that's why I went off and did that. But, you know, again, the biggest thing was trying to figure out, okay, well, what do I do with the rest of my life? But maybe if I go in the military, I'll have some experiences there that will, you know, take me in another direction, a better direction, or whatever. You know, I was just open to all possibilities.
Well, Al, wasn't this also during the Vietnam War? Because you said
yes, that's correct. It was just starting to heat up there in the spring of '61 when I went in, and Actually, I remember the recruiter told me, you know, he was familiar with my background and how I had left college after one semester. He said there was a way you could get back into college at government expense, get college credits, and then, you know, you can take the rest of it from there after your military career is over. And that was if you, at basic training, were offered the opportunity to take language screening to see if you have the ability to learn a foreign language. And I thought that was interesting. I had studied German in college, and probably that was the course that I had gotten my best grades in. Even though in high school it was biology and math and all of those things that where I was best. My best grades came. So he said, if you get an opportunity to take that screening, take it. Because they send people to schools all over the country, colleges, like Yale and Syracuse, Indiana, and all those places, so you learn a foreign language. So I took the screening, and the screening was in this language called Urdu. And at the time, I had no idea what Urdu was. It sounded, you know, they made sounds I never heard before.
Right.
And it turns out that's the language of Pakistan, I later learned. But they started teaching you the language to see if you could recognize sounds and repeat them. If somebody said, and I'm just going to make up a word because I don't remember any of the Urdu, say mashi or something like that. If you heard somebody say mashi, you could recognize it in print, and so on. So anyway, I was selected and at basic training for language training, and guess where they sent me? Yale.
Yeah, okay.
And they sent me to study Korean, the Korean language. And the reason for this was intelligence work. I was going to be in communications intelligence. You obviously have heard of the NSA, the National Security Agency. Each one of the branches of the service is connected to the NSA. Any of their communications intelligence information gets funneled to the NSA, which is based in Fort Meade, Maryland. And I worked as a linguist. What we did is, my branch of the service being Air Force, we monitored the Air Force of North Korea. And that was pretty exciting. Exciting stuff. We listened to the pilots talk to see what their terminology was. We could tell from the way they used their terminology and the different words they used to describe what was going on with the airplane. We could figure out what type of plane they were flying. And if they were in a high-performance plane, we could tell that too, because in the older planes, they tended to have throat mics, a microphone right around like a collar, and it would pick up the sounds from your voice box by being at your throat. But the more high-performance airplanes would have, the microphone would be integrated with the pilot's helmet.
Okay.
And it wouldn't be a leather helmet as they would have had in World War II. It would be a more modern helmet made of heavy-duty plastics and whatever else they made the helmets out of. So we could hear a distinctive hiss in the background, and we could tell it was a high-performance plane. Back then, a high-performance plane would have been a MiG-21 jet, all Russian-made equipment, and when the North Koreans were supported by Russia back then. And so that was a great experience. I had met a girl when I was here at Yale in 1961. I studied the language for like a whole year, a calendar year. And it was 6 hours a day in class, and then all the homework drills afterwards. And we learned conversational Korean, and then we got into the military terminology. It wasn't until later, after leaving Yale, that we got into some of the more top secret terminology and code words and all of these other things that we had to know to do our job to support the U.S. intelligence effort. And I met a girl from Hamden, and I really liked her. We fell in love. And I said, how am I going to get back to Yale? Okay. They didn't have any advanced Korean, but they did have Chinese. So I signed up to take Chinese, but I had to extend my enlistment, which was 4 years already, but I had to extend it by about 1.5 years in order to have enough time to go back overseas after I finished my training and use Chinese to monitor the Chinese Air Force. And so I signed up. No sooner signed up than I got the Dear Al letter.
Okay.
And you know what the Dear Al letter is? Well, Al, I've met somebody else, and you know, we've had a great time together, and sayonara. You know? So I said, oh boy, this is great. But you know what happened? I came back to Yale in late 1964, or 63, actually, right after President Kennedy was killed. And about a week or so after I was there, I met my wife, the woman who's now my wife, in a coffee shop in New Haven on Wall Street. And it was called George and Harry's then. It was a coffee shop restaurant, very well known. There were 2 or 3 of those restaurants in New Haven at the time. And we fell in love, and we were married the following year. And this year, we're marking our 50th wedding anniversary in August.
Well, Al, let's just end it for the first segment right there after your 50th year anniversary.
Yeah.
Very good way to end the first break of this show, and then we're going to come back and get into your professional career that led you to this state. Again, I'm enjoying this program this morning with my very special guest, Al Terzi, Dean in News, as he's labeled. And again, we're going to be right back very shortly, so stay tuned. Okay.
I'm very happy to be here tonight to congratulate and support accesstv.org. Accesstv.org has reached hundreds and thousands of people. It's done a great job informing the community about important issues in our city, our state, and our nation. I congratulate Stan McCauley and Naisha for the job they've done. And now with their new format, which will reach many more people, and which will be available through many more formats, the future is very bright for accesstv.org. Congratulations, and may you continue your mission of informing our community. Thank you very much.
Welcome back there. This is Jonathan Small hosting All About You, and this morning I have as my very special guest veteran news anchor Al Terzi. Al, we're going to kind of now shift into, I guess, the 70s, because most of the first part of the show you was kind of sitting on your life pretty much during the 60s.
Sure.
And I guess you entered the business basically in Connecticut in 1968.
Yes, in Connecticut. That's when I arrived here. I had been in the business, as I mentioned earlier, as a DJ, and even while I was in the Air Force, and if I were overseas, I would volunteer work in addition to my communications intelligence work. I would volunteer at the Armed Forces radio station in Korea and in Taiwan. I would do that. Do a disc jockey show and that sort of thing. And then when I was at an air base in Texas where they get into the top secret training that we need for intelligence work, I worked off the base at a radio station initially, and then I got in 1967, I got my first TV job. And you know what that was doing? I was doing the weather.
The weather, okay.
So I have when I've been on the news as a news anchor, I always had a special affinity for the people who did the weather, and I understood a lot about it because I had to learn about the weather when I was doing this job. My first radio job was for $1 an hour.
Oh.
My first TV job was for $2 an hour.
Okay.
In 1967, it was part-time. Besides the weather, I also did station breaks. You're watching KCTV, San Angelo. That's where I was stationed at the time, way out in West Texas. A lot of sheep ranchers and a lot of flat country. And in Texas, you can drive for hours and hours and still be in Texas. Hours and hours.
Large state.
Oh, yeah.
Large state.
This was West Texas, and I remember one time going to El Paso we drove west for 6 hours, and we were still in Texas. I was already in the western part of Texas.
Yeah.
And 6 hours later, I still wasn't out of Texas.
Wasn't out of Texas.
That's how big Texas is. But so I got out in this, May of 1968. I was discharged after 7 years and 1 month in the Air Force, and decided to come back to Connecticut because this is where my wife was from. We already had one child, our son Tony,
yes,
whom you know from your getting onto his radio show in the morning on Saturdays. And I came back here and I started knocking on every door. And back then they did auditions. You didn't send a recording, demo reel or a demo disc that shows your work. You had to go there and do an audition. And so one of the places where I auditioned was Channel 3. And they eventually called me back for a second audition. I was considering going to work for Channel 18. Which was back then, as I recall, was a pay TV channel, and it was located right on Asylum Street, just before it splits off into Asylum Avenue in Hartford. And it was in a building. At that time, the general manager, or maybe he had just been the general manager and had gone on from there, Charles Osgood, the popular host on Sunday morning on CBS, CBS TV, the guy that wears the bow tie all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. But as they were telling me, we're just going to complete the background investigation and then you're going to be hired, Channel 3 called me back for a second audition. And I went there for the second audition and I was hired there.
Well, Al, Channel 3 at that time, and it's still, I guess, the largest viewing audience here in Connecticut. Was WFSB at that time in 1968 a major TV station, or was it just growing? I mean, what was that?
It was the station.
Okay.
It was the place to work. I worked there. I was hired as what they call a staff announcer. That means you come in there and they can put you on any program, whether it's radio or TV.
Okay.
And because it was at that time, it was WTIC AM radio and FM. And back then, FM was not what it is today, not TIC FM with the rock music and the pop songs and all of that. This was with operas. And so when you were in there, you had to know the terminology and how to pronounce the names of the various works and the artists. And so you had to know a lot. And I learned a lot. And I learned a lot from the other people who were much more established in the business than I was at that time. I was only 25 years old when I was hired at Channel 3 and WTIC Radio. And I worked on the radio, did a DJ show, did an interview show, and I did commercials. I worked with Bob Steele in the morning.
He was a legend here, Bob Steele. No doubt about that.
No question. Everybody knows Bob Steele, except probably now the people born in the 80s.
The 80s, right.
They maybe heard about him, but they don't know who he was. But anyway, I had a lot of people who were my mentors back then, teaching me what works and what doesn't work in radio and TV. And very soon after I was hired, I would say within just a few months, I was tapped to go on the air and anchor the news. I was filling in for somebody else, but that's how I got my first experience, real experience anchoring the news. When I was in Texas doing the weather, I did occasionally find myself reading the news for somebody on vacation. And on those nights I also did the weather. Yeah. So that happened, but I really got into doing TV news then. Although at that time, the anchors were the staff announcers. The news department had its own reporters. But we couldn't mix in the sense that I couldn't do reporting and they couldn't do anchoring. So only the staff announcers could do the anchoring. And and I couldn't write the news. I couldn't change anything that was written for me unless I asked. I said, this doesn't sound right. Can I say it this way? I had to get permission to do that. But there came a time when WTIC, AM, FM, and TV split up, the AM and FM went to one ownership group, and the TV station was purchased by Post Newsweek Corporation, which is part of the Washington Post organization, very respected organization in the journalism field. And they insisted that every person who was anchoring be a working reporter, be capable of being a correspondent, going out and covering stories as well as anchoring the news. And so I was in the position of learning to report after I had already been an established anchor on the news.
But Al, excuse me, I mean, everything at that time had to be so different, because you got to keep in mind, we didn't have the internet or technology. You didn't have cable. You didn't have CNN. So you was kind of just limited, basically, just if you wanted to listen or hear about your news from the basic television stations, like your local affiliates, because you didn't have the whole web and you didn't have the internet.
That's right.
So how did your mindset go into knowing that, you know, if you didn't catch the news in that one particular day, you had to wait almost to the next day to find out exactly what took place? Or was it another format, like a 6 and 11 o'clock?
Well, first the schedule back then was very limited. Fox now, where I've most recently worked, they do, I think it's 9 hours a day of news. When I started at Channel 3, they were doing a 15-minute newscast at 6:15. They started the news at 6 o'clock with the weather from what was then the Travelers Weather Service. They provide Travelers Insurance Company. That's how WTIC got its name, its call letters.
Okay.
TIC stands for Travelers Insurance Corporation.
Okay.
And so that's where that came from. And they had their own weather service staffed with meteorologists, and the meteorologists would be on Channel 3 to do the weather at the top of the hour at 6 o'clock. The first thing was the weather. And now even today, a lot of times we'll lead a newscast with the weather because that affects everybody, and people want to know about it. But there was 5 minutes of weather, then there was 10 minutes of sports. Now, local sports guys are lucky to get 2 or 2.5 minutes for sports. And then we had 15 minutes of news. So from 6 to 6:30, that's when the news block was on. Weather first, then sports, and then news, local news. And then right after that, at 6:30, Walter Cronkite came on with the CBS Evening News, the TV station. Interestingly, this TV station was a CBS affiliate, but the radio station was an NBC affiliate. Okay. So, you know, that was just an anomaly, I think, although I don't remember. Maybe there were other stations around that had a split affiliation where they had an AM station and a TV station, but I don't know of any. And so, again, I had a great experience there working for 10 years in my first time there. Before I went to Florida, I had an opportunity to go down to Florida and work there. But I had to cover a lot of stories, and going up to the Capitol for the first time was daunting for me. I mean, like Tony, my son Tony, who's now in reporting news and even anchoring the news, I had to learn a lot about the workings of the Capitol and the courts. Very fascinated with the courts, and that's why I eventually went to law school. But that was many years later.
But Al, you mentioned Florida, and this is you spent 2 years, I believe, down in Florida.
That's correct.
But many people might not be aware, your career was going pretty much, you know, progressively. You was moving up, you was learning the business.
Right.
And then you got into a traumatic experience with a plane crash that almost killed you. Could you kind of let people know exactly what took place?
Yes, sure. At that time, I had been flying for about 4 years. When I was in the Air Force, I thought, you know, boy, this would be great if maybe I had an opportunity to fly. But back then, they were very picky about the vision situation. As you can see, I wear glasses. I'm nearsighted. And of course, now I have a little bit of trouble reading without glasses, but not too much. I can read with or without the glasses. It's just distant vision. But you had to have perfect distant vision back then, distance vision. And so when I got out of the Air Force, one of the things I eventually ended up doing was learning to fly.
Right.
And at that point, I had just learned to fly twin-engine airplanes. I learned at Brainerd Airport. And the station that hired me which was part of the attraction for going there, had 3 airplanes, all twin-engine airplanes. The general manager and president of the company flew a bigger twin-engine plane, but he had 2 smaller ones. And I learned to fly those. And I was in one of those. It was a Cessna 310. It was a 6-passenger, 200-mile-an-hour airplane.
Okay.
And I learned how to fly that. And I was taking, this was October 7th of 1978.
1978.
Yeah, 1978. And I had only been down in Florida since that June. So this wasn't too, I wasn't there very long at all when this happened. We were going to a broadcaster seminar in Tallahassee at the state capitol. And from West Palm Beach, where the airplane was based, to there was probably a 400-mile trip, so that's about 2 hours in that airplane. And we took off that morning before the sun came up. It was dark, but the sun came up within a half hour after we took off. And enough for us to, when we were flying over Disney World and then headed out toward the western part of the state and then north to Tallahassee. I had descended for a landing, and I was at about 2,000 feet, as I recall, and all of a sudden I lost the left engine, and then very quickly the right engine. So here we are with no engines to deliver thrust, and this airplane, 2.5-ton airplane, was up in the air with no power. The propellers were still going around, but they weren't really generating thrust. And I'm looking at the fuel gauges. I had 4 hours worth of fuel in the plane when I left, and how could, where would the fuel be? Okay. And so they said, the gauges said I had a half tank, half the fuel left, and I couldn't figure out what had happened. I said maybe something got into it, but anyway, the first thing you do though is you don't think about all these things very much. You got to fly the airplane. You got to figure out what you're going to do now. You lost power, so I put on. They have this electric boost pump that boosts the fuel going into the engines. I put that on and switched fuel tanks just to see if maybe something was wrong with the gauge on the tank that I was flying on. There were 2 sets of tanks, and I got power back. Okay. And I said, "Oh, this is good." Okay, but I got to find out what's going on after we land. And but then a minute later, I lost power again. And in the meantime, I had lost more altitude, and I was still maybe 3 or 4 miles from the airport, and I wasn't going to make the airport. I wasn't going to be able to reach the airport with no thrust. So I had to make a quick decision to try to put the plane down somewhere safe. And I'm looking around, and there's nothing but forest. Big pine trees, 60 feet tall, that kind of thing. And so I had to look for a clearing somewhere, and eventually I did find one off to the right, and I banked over to the right, and I set up to get down into that clearing. It looked like kind of a short clearing, so I didn't have much room, so I was going to have to get it down on the ground fast, so that, because if I stayed aloft a little too long, if I tried to float it in, I might be at the other end of the clearing before I touched down, and then I'd be smashing into trees at the other end of the clearing. So I came over some trees and went down into the clearing as fast as I could, and then I remember hitting the ground, and after that I don't remember anything.
Well, let's end this second part on that note, and we're going to come back and tell the people exactly what happened after that particular experience. This is Jonathan Small again. I'm hosting All About You this morning with my very special guest, Al Terzi, and we will be right back very shortly. Thank you.
At Hartford Public Schools, we care about one thing above all, the future of our kids. That's why we're dedicated to providing all students with the knowledge and skills needed in the new global culture. Hartford Public Schools is thriving. More student success stories, more world-class facilities, more university and corporate partnerships, more amazing talent coming and staying in Hartford. This is how education is supposed to work. Welcome to Hartford Public Schools, where the future is present.
Welcome back again. This is Jonathan Small hosting All About You this morning, and I'm having a very interesting conversation with my guest, veteran news anchor Al Terzi. Al, before we get back into exactly what happened after the plane landed, in life, in anything you do, but a profession where you have to come across a camera and let people actually see you, sometimes there's horror stories that happen that could affect you personally, and you kind of got to block it out. This incident in life, things can happen to you, you know. I mean, you might hear news stories like what took place in Sandy Hook and how that can make you just not ready to get in front of a camera. But I guess in life you have to be a very professional person. And I think this experience that took place with the plane crash, well, first of all, what exactly happened after the plane landed? Because let people know exactly what happened. You said you didn't remember the last.
Yeah, the first thing I remembered after we did the crash landing was suddenly being aware of my surroundings and feeling wetness on my face. And my first thought was, is my nose running? I didn't know what it was, and so I put my hand there, and massive amounts of blood showed up on my hand. And I said, oh my goodness, this is not a dream, this really happened.
Right.
And what actually happened was on the impact, I was thrown against the control panel with my face, and that's where I was heavily damaged physically. In any case, when I came to, I made sure all the switches were off so there wouldn't be any fire after the crash and that sort of thing. And then I looked around for the other people in the plane. There were 4 other people with me in the plane, and nobody was in the plane. I was wondering where they were. And then I looked out the side window, and I spotted them over some distance away from the plane. They were all gathered over there. So I unbuckled myself from the seat and climbed out of the plane, stood on the wing to get out of the plane and onto the ground, walked over to them, and they were in shock when they saw me. I didn't know how bad I looked, but I was just concerned about them. How's everybody? And I remember starting to cry because I didn't know what had happened, whether it was something I didn't do that I should have done or something I did that I shouldn't have done. And I just said, I'm sorry I put you guys in this position. And they said, don't worry about it. We're fine. How are you? And so on. And I said, I don't know. I'm feeling chilly. It was a clear day, like this day this morning. There was no weather issue or anything like that. But we were out in the middle of the woods, and they were sitting around, and one of them had a broken ankle, it turned out. Another one had a broken wrist. And there was another one who was sitting way in the back. He suffered double vision for a while after that. But so they were relatively minor injuries, but mine were apparently pretty serious. I didn't have any broken bones anywhere else except in my face, as it turns out. So I decided I was starting to feel a little chilled, and this was probably shock coming on. And so I went to lie down on the ground, on the grass, and protected myself, put my arms like this. I didn't have anything else because I had a summer shirt on. In October, it's still summer in Florida. So, and I just waited for help. I had called for, I had made an emergency call before we made the landing. I called the control tower at Tallahassee and told them we may have an emergency here. I said running low on fuel. I mean, because I didn't know what else it could be. But I didn't understand the gauges. But I just had to get a quick message out. And anyway, they did get a crew there, an emergency crew, to come in, and they put me on a stretcher. They intubated me, put this breathing tube down my throat because it turned out later that I was bleeding so much they didn't want me to aspirate any of the blood and other tissue or whatever into my lungs and all that, so that's why they intubate you so you can breathe. And that was a horrible experience where they were shoving the tube down my throat. You have the gag reflex.
They didn't put you to sleep? You had to stay alert?
No, I mean, they started giving me morphine for pain, although I don't remember having any pain, but they automatically gave me morphine. And then they put me on the back of a pickup truck, a 4-wheel drive truck that was the only way they could get in there to take me to a more open spot where the ambulance was waiting. And then I was in and out of consciousness on the way to the hospital in the ambulance. I have a vague recollection of the emergency room coming to there, and they were cutting my trousers off. And then the next thing I know, it was later that day, I believe this was a Saturday morning, it was later that day that I awoke in intensive care. And you hear all the beeps going on, but I couldn't see anything. And then I touched my face and I realized my head was totally bandaged. And then this nurse came along and cut little eye holes for me so I could see. And it wasn't until a few days later that I learned the full extent of my injuries. My cheekbone was crushed. I had nerve damage. I still do.
Okay.
This part of my face is numb, as if you had, you can imagine having Novocaine. And the Novocaine,
it's still numb now, you're saying?
It's still numb right
okay.
now. When I touch it, it feels numb. It's funny because now whenever it's in wintertime and when you get a cold and you might have a runny nose, there are times when I don't know my nose is running.
Because of the numbness that you have.
Because of the numbness. So I invite others to let me know if they see my nose running. And
Well, excuse me, let me just say this. Many people may not even be aware. The people on the plane, they got out, but they thought that you was dead. They thought maybe that you bled to death. So
that's right. They saw me slumped over in the plane and bleeding profusely.
Yes.
So they thought I was dead, so they just left me there. Well, I can understand that. I might have thought the same thing.
And they was also concerned that the plane might explode or blow up. Was that part of the reason too?
Well, there's always a concern with that, with the fuel on board, and if there's any kind of electric spark that could ignite it, and the plane would go up in flames. I was lucky that didn't happen.
Right. So God was definitely looking over you at that particular time.
Yes. I lived another day, and I was in the hospital for 9 days.
But believe it or not, Al, you was back on the news within a year.
That's correct. Yeah, I went back on the air the following May. This was from October to May. I had, in the meantime, had a couple of plastic surgeries done. What they had to do is they took this part of my nose between the nostrils was cut away. Actually, I saw a picture from the emergency room, and they were holding my nose out here, away from my face. It was literally lacerated all the way through. And my cheekbone was crushed, and the nerve damage was there. I had a blowout of the orbit, the bony floor of your eye socket where your eyeball sits, and so there was a hole there because of the pressure from the impact blew a hole in it, and this eyeball was sinking down in the hole. So my eyes were a little, kind of like a chameleon, I guess.
Yeah.
It was rather subtle. You unless you looked at it very carefully, you wouldn't see it. But they had to fix that. So for that they took a piece of bone from my hip and did a graft, and put that to cover the hole, and that raised the eye up to the same level so I could see properly. And for this part of my nose, they took cartilage from my ear and put that in there. So I've got my ear in my nose and my hip in my eye.
Oh, boy.
So that's how they kind of put me back together, and then they had to do some adjustments on the mouth and all that. But I got a nose job out of that.
Okay.
But anyway, I am so lucky. I know that. I thank God every day for that.
Well, this is also over 35 years, so I don't know if every now and then it comes back to you that, what took place. I mean, are you able to block it out, or do every now and then something might just trigger what took place towards how you almost, lost your life? Is it that?
Well, sure. Yeah, every now and then it does. If I see an airplane, now I don't fly anymore. I didn't fly for 14 years. My wife insisted that she didn't want to go through that because I usually call her when I arrive, and that morning I hadn't called her about the time that I would have arrived, that she anticipated I was arriving. So she was a little worried, but she figured I just got busy, and it wasn't until almost noon, and the crash was just before 8:30. That they finally found her where she was and told her what had happened. And so here she is 400 miles away, and she's got to get on a plane not knowing what my situation was. So that was that was pretty traumatic for her. So she didn't want me to fly, and I didn't fly for 14 years. But when I turned 50, she gave me a gift certificate because she knew I missed flying. A gift certificate to go back to the airport and get checked out and fly again. And I did fly for a couple more years, but by then the cost of flying an airplane, private airplane, was getting prohibitively expensive for me anyway. I wasn't making a lot of money. I was doing okay. I mean, I was grateful for what I had, but you know, with family concerns, you can't be spending your money on an expensive hobby like that. So I eventually gave it up, and so I haven't flown since 1994. So it's now 20 years.
Now, you say you haven't flown, you mean flying on your own or just flying in general?
Flying on my own.
On your own,
I mean, there are a couple of times when I've been up with people. One time I went on a Homeland Security flight with the state police, and I was in the right seat, and the pilot let me fly it for a little bit. And so that was fun to do. And other times we've been with friends who have a friend who has a plane, and I've flown from the right seat. But you know, I miss it, but you know, it's kind of, you know, I'm still very much interested in aviation, but now, you know, it's just too expensive to fly. So I just put that out of my mind. And if I want to fly, I go on my flight simulator on the computer. You know?
Okay, do it that way.
So yeah, that's the airplane story. I was so grateful, and I have to tell you, there was one time when I got a card from a viewer up here, delivered to the hospital. And inside the card, a get well card, was a note from the woman who wrote it. I think she was from Middletown. And she was explaining to me, she wanted to wish me well, and she told me in the letter that she had just lost her son in a car crash 2 weeks earlier. And she felt like reaching out to me. So here's a woman in the middle of this grief over losing her son in a car crash, sending me a note wishing me well in my recovery. I just was, you know, that was amazing to me. But one thing was that was in that card. There was a quote from the British novelist Aldous Huxley, and the quote was, "A man's life is not measured by what happens to him, but rather by what he does with what happens to him."
Okay.
So I thought that was pretty profound, and I kind of have used that since then to kind of reorient my thinking. Now, okay, I'm in a situation. It may not be to my liking. What am I going to do about it?
Right.
And how am I going to rise above it if it's a bad situation? And if it's a good situation, okay, what am I going to do with this gift, this happening that came my way, that given me some benefit? What can I do to advance that and create more good? And you know, for people, and I've always been a people person, and so that stuck with me through then. And I had my doubts about when I was in the hospital whether I'd ever be able to be on TV again. I thought that I was probably so disfigured that I would never be able to do it again. But then, amazingly, within the following year, there I was back on TV again.
Well, Al, I mean, you know, your career at that point went, you know, successful throughout the 80s, throughout the 90s, throughout the 2000s. So you had a very successful career. You had just recently retired.
Yes.
What do you plan to do now that after you officially retiring from Fox 61 News?
Well, I'm continuing to be with Fox to do the political program with Lori Perez. It's called The Real Story. It's on Sunday morning at 10. We tape it on Thursday evening.
Okay.
So I go in for 3 hours or so to do the preparation, write the scripts, and then actually tape the interviews. But that's what I'm doing. That's the extent of what I'm doing with Fox right now. So I'm a freelancer there. I'm also teaching at the Connecticut School of Broadcasting in Farmington. But that's relatively limited because I'm teaching in the 8-week class. They have 2 classes going in tandem at the same time. One is an 8-week day class where you have more hours in the day that you can do the work, so you finish it in half of the time. Then the other class that's running at the same time is a 16-week night class. And obviously there's more limited time at night for somebody who has a job during the day to go there at night. So it takes longer for them to get through the same amount of material. So in the course of a year, there would be 3 8-week sessions in which I would be involved. But I'm only there for certain of the classes because the curriculum there takes people through all aspects of radio as well as all aspects of TV and TV news. So they use me mainly for talking about writing and anchoring and reporting and interviewing. And so with classes that relate to that, and then helping them prepare for their final exam, which is to actually produce a 30-minute newscast. I'm probably there maybe 6 times in an 8-week period. And when I say 6 times, I mean I go there for 4 hours each time. So 3 times a year I'm involved, and it's only 5 or 6 times each 8-week class. So that's limited. I'm now starting to work on getting into voiceovers, narrations, and even commercials.
Okay.
I haven't done anything yet with that, but in terms of being successful in getting any work, but it's a rigorous process trying to get noticed. I'm now putting together a demo disc so that I can send that out to different producers and let them know this is the range of the work I can do, the kinds of commercials, kinds of narrations, and that sort of thing. And we'll see where that goes. But I'm just working on that now.
Well, let's end it on that particular note because we're out of time. But it definitely seems like you have other goals that you want to obtain after your retirement, that you do got a plan to continue somewhat into this particular business.
Well, I do, and I'm not going to be working full-time again, but I just want to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and have a more relaxed pace.
Yes. Well, I wish you the very blessed in whatever decision that you decide to continue to pursue. And I enjoy listening to your son, Tony Terzi, every Saturday. I'm one of his regular callers.
I know you are. And
Okay.
I'm very proud of his success. And, you know, on my bucket list, I've scratched off working with Tony. Not only me as an anchor and he as a reporter, but we actually got to anchor the news together the day after Christmas, this past Christmas. So that's a bucket list thing. I've been wanting for years and years to work together. He started out as I did, as a DJ, but he went to sports first. But now he's in news, and I'm so proud of him.
Yeah, well, again, I wish both of y'all the very blessed. And I had enjoyed this very inspirational conversation that we had this morning.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I
No problem, Al.
enjoyed being with you, Jonathan.
All right. Okay. I had enjoyed doing this program. This was a very interesting show I did, and there's other great programs to watch on accesstv.org network throughout the week. And as I also say every particular week to people out there, have a very blessed day and keep the faith. Thank you.